Thank you for inviting me here to speak at UC San Diego. Today's presentation is about Paleolithic astronomy. We define the Paleolithic by Stone Age people who use stones for tools, from roughly 2,700 million years ago to 11,000 years before present. We may call people Paleo in more recent times who use stone tools, such as people in Northern Asia and Native Americans when people from Europe first arrived. The question that's been asked throughout history is, what makes somebody a modern man? What makes someone a thinking, reasonable person? And we can look at all these faces. These are all people who had stone tools. We have Homo sapiens, Erectus, Neanderthal, and habilis, many others. The question has always been, what makes us truly modern man? I would argue that it's time. It's our perspective of time. We can look to the past and we can foresee the future. And time evolved, or our perception of time evolved. Perhaps we first started with the moon, then the sun, the constellations in the night sky, and ultimately the time of day. This particular sundial clock encaptures everything within one picture. Our ability to do this is quite unique, because to be able to see the stars in that sky as objects, we have to project our psyche into the cosmos to identify them, to connect the dots, or those particular stars. We do the same thing with rocks, geological formations, as well as the clouds. We may look to the clouds and see an elephant or find a horse in crevices of a rock. As far as we know, this is unique to Homo sapiens. A chimpanzee wouldn't even understand this concept. Chimpanzees are quite smart. They have sign language in the natural environment. They have more than 40 language gestures. And they've been demonstrated or have learned more than 400 sign language gestures in captivity. But they can't make art as we do. They can't project their psyche into the cosmos. As far as we know, they can't look into the stars in the night sky and form images. We've been doing this for a long time. And the early mentions of the constellations are the Great Bears, Ursa Major, the Great Bear being typically a she-bear, the hero hunter Orion, who typically chases a group of people or women in the stars of the Pleiades, and the dog as the constellation Sirius, the Sirius being the brightest star in the night sky. And we find these traditions among Native Americans, people in Siberia, the Tuareg of the Sahara, Aboriginal Australians, and among the ancient Greeks. Now, what's curious about this is the first three, one could actually picture them as what we have found them in the literature. But the dog in the star of Sirius makes no sense. And it asks the question, is there a common origin to all these constellations? Was there an original storyteller who looked at the night sky and saw the pictures? Well, we can go back to the earliest artwork that we have, or at least dated artwork, at Monte Castillo in the Cantabria region of Spain, where in 2012, a paper was published in Science, the journal Science, that had dated a dot on the so-called panel of hands to 40,000 years ago as a minimum date. This was a new technique to date rock art and was became widely used throughout anthropology and archaeology. It was a big splash because we had finally come to what we could say is a very old time period of cave art. But it was only one red disc, which we can see among those on the panel. It didn't make a very interesting picture, and so all the media, both the scientific and the popular media, ran with a different image from the saved cave system. And that image is the gallery of discs, where a red disc was dated to a minimum age of 34,000 years ago. This is a much more interesting image because it's appealing to the eye. We see those red discs running across this 10-meter wide panel. It's a beautiful scene. We're drawn into the red discs in the same way we're drawn to red lipstick or the red dress, the red car. A stop sign draws our attention. It's at the other end of the natural spectrum from our blue-green world. And of course, McDonald's and DQ and Burger King use that same red to draw our attention. The original work on this, at least the scientific work, goes back to Nicholas Tinbergen, who won a Nobel Prize for his work, The Study of Instinct. And Tinbergen had a fish in a tank by his window. And every day that a red delivery truck came by, the fish went into a defensive posture. Tinbergen reasoned that because these fish don't have the cerebral hemispheres, the gray matter that gives us cognitive thinking, and that their brainstem dominated, that the attraction to red is in fact a core instinct of animals. And we may be as well, as we're drawn to these red discs. But let's step aside from the red discs and see what we find. What's going on in this panel? We find this teacher speaking to the ear of the apprentice. The artist uses the red discs as the eyes of the apprentice. We can see his flared nose and his slightly open mouth. He's listening. And the teacher has a large nose and a strong chin. And we can see his black hair, or appears to be his black hair, on top of the head. These two characters would be about 3 meters across. Well, if we look a little further, we may find that that black hair on his head is actually a golden eagle, or rather a fledgling golden eagle. We can see the down on the flanks. This would indicate a mid-June time period in that time and place. And on the same panel, we find this elephant. Elephant with its trunk down, apparently drinking water, with its ear back and relaxed. And another elephant with its ear up and trunk up, raised as if in distress. It has a wincing eye. If we look at these elephants side by side, they're actually of the same ears and trunk. But the artist is giving us two different perceptions of the same image. Perhaps he's telling us a story of an elephant that comes down to the water and then is alerted, raises its trunk. The theoretical physicist David Bohm said, the ability to perceive or think differently is more important than the knowledge gained. And I believe that is the lesson that is given by this Paleolithic artist. Because now we're looking beyond the red discs. We're seeing the savannah through the panel, the forest through the trees. We still use these tricks in our modern time. This was an image I pulled offline, and very quickly you can see the elephant, you see the donkey between its legs, you see the dog and the cat, and the rat down at the bottom. But there's many more characters in that image that are not as easily apparent to most people. In psychology, this is called an embedded figures test. And as fast as I said psychology, for people who are wired for this trait, they would have solved the test. So we all think differently. We all perceive the world differently because of the way that we're wired. The artist Bev Doolittle plays the same trick with these horses. And there are 4 adult horses and 1 juvenile. She uses the red to draw attention. We can go back to the gallery of discs, and we can find this speckled mare with the same technique. The red discs become speckles on the horse. It has a raised mane, and the muzzle is typical of a Presincius horse, which is indigenous to Eurasia. It's a leaping horse. And overlapping this red horse is this cosmic man. In his right hand, we can see it's raised. He holds the egg. His left hand is feathered against the wall. His left knee is raised. His right leg is uncertain. He wears a mask. On one side of the mask, or the right side of this mask, you can see the beak of a bird. On the left side, you can see his eye. And below the mask, you can see his chin and his teeth. Remember, the right hand holds the egg, and the left arm is feathered against the wall. We find the same motif throughout time, and this is Odin among the Norse tradition, who loses an eye to gain wisdom. Did the Norse draw from the same tradition? There's also the egg, and in myth, we call the singularity, or the beginning of the cosmos, as the cosmic egg. And we find the myth in the traditions of the Dogon, the Norse, the Dogon of Africa, the Vedic, the Orphic Greek, the Chinese, Egyptian, the Roman mythos. And in the Chinese Pengu tradition, we see Pengu in the top image breaking free from the cosmic egg, and with the swing of his axe, he creates the yin and the yang. And later in the story, he holds up the sky, which is very similar to the Greek Atlas tradition, and Shu among the Egyptians. In the Theoretic cosmology, we find the character hatching from the egg, and around him, or her, we see the constellations. The right hand is next to Gemini, the twins, and the Pegasus is above the head. Father George Lemaitre, a Belgian Catholic priest and astronomer, drew on the cosmic egg to formulate his hypothesis of the primeval atom, which is the origin story, or at least our scientific origin story, of the Big Bang. It was a mathematical model. Einstein said that your math is correct, but your physics is atrocious, because at that time, physics was not in favor of what we now call the Big Bang. And the Big Bang itself was a criticism or a joke, an orgasmic moment about Father Lemaitre's work. When Father Lemaitre's work came out, Pope Pius XII came out in favor, and he said that this proves that there is a creation, therefore there must be a creator. And the scientific community did down until Edwin Hubble came out and observed what he believed to be an expanding universe. And now we commonly use the word Big Bang as a scientific explanation or description. But this myth of the Big Bang, or rather the cosmic egg, may go back to a much earlier time, because we see this cosmic man holding the egg. And we'll learn more about this as we go through the panel. We find this man holding the egg as well in his right hand, and his left hand is feathered behind him, in the same as the cosmic man we saw before. In this image, we can see him taking the mask on and off, or with and without the mask. So we're talking about transformation, a spiritual transformation. On the panel, we find the great auk, the now extinct great auk, and the egg, where that man steals the egg from, and the egg that is held by the cosmic man has the same description as those laid by the great auk. And again, we see that cosmic man holding the egg. He's the story. Well, there's other transformations going on in this image. That cosmic man with the beak off the left side of his face, and the eye on the left. If we shift him 90 degrees, we find the teacher. The teacher has transformed in the cosmic egg as part of telling this story. And the cosmic man is behind the speckled mare and becomes the cosmic rider, or a centaur in the Greek tradition. This is a therianthrope. Now, this man does not become a golden eagle, and he does not become a centaur. But on his journey, he draws the spirit or the strength of these animals, in the same way we do today, or have in the movies of Batman and Spider-Man and other heroes of comics. This may be one of the original comics. On the panel, we also find this mother Iberian lynx, and under her chin is being pushed up by her kitten. It's a touching scene. The size of the kitten relative to the mother would indicate a mid to late June time period, and the same as the fledgling golden eagle. And this animal is indigenous to the Iberian Spain today. Going across the panel, we find that either a spinning bottlenose dolphin or multiple dolphins. You can see all the fins. So now we've stepped into a marine environment. And our man who is stealing the egg overlaps with the dolphin to become a merman, a therianthrope. But again, in the tradition, he's gaining strength from the animal. The character does not become a merman. Although apparently the Greeks had taken these characters from the past as if there were mermen and there were centaurs. In the same way as we look into archaeology and paleontology, and we find bones of dinosaurs, and we say, well, these were dinosaurs. Well, the ancient Greeks apparently did the same thing when they looked at these panels and walked away with the concept that these beings had existed before their time. And we find another marine animal, a crab, scurrying from under the rock. A monk seal lounging on the rocks. So we're in a marine environment. And we find, of course, a man swimming in that same section. His head is going up and down, and his right arm is doing a crawl. His left arm is up and cupped. Hand is cupped. And our swimmer overlaps with another elephant, an elephant that is swimming in a sky view. At the end of this panel, we find this man who holds a club and has a pelt around his neck, apparently from something he's slain. This character is also depicted with red hair, which is quite interesting. And in this tradition, or in the myth, the dolphin raises the man above the water. So in the story, the artist is telling us that this is a point where that man is at the water. And the water south of the Iberian Peninsula would be the Strait of Gibraltar. So one would expect that on the other side of the Strait of Gibraltar, he would encounter African animals. In this case, we find two giraffes, a mother giraffe with a head on top, and the artist uses the red disc to become a molted pattern, and the juvenile giraffe wraps around her neck in protection. Again, we have a touching scene very similar to the Iberian lynx and her kitten. This is not about hunting animals, escaping animals. This is about learning from the animals. And below them we find this Spitz, so it's a companion animal. This is not a hunting dog, this is not a retrieving dog, and this is not even a very good guard dog. And the Spitz's tail flips back on its back. And the Spitz is one of the oldest dogs in the DNA record, far beyond 30,000 years. We find this Barbary ape at the bottom. And Barbary apes are now in Gibraltar, where this bottom picture was taken. However, they're indigenous to the Atlas Mountains of western North Africa, Morocco. And the artist describes all the idiosyncrasies of how this Barbary ape sits. We find a huge lion on top with a mane splayed out, and the lioness who comes up to lick him. And a mother bear and her two cubs with conical heads. She's looking up to them. I believe that these bears are climbing trees, which would be typical of bears in the midsummer. And they're looking for safety, and the mother teaches them to do that. And when the bears grow old enough that the mother's ready to let them go, she alerts them to run up the trees, and then she walks away. It is in the life history of bears. And we find this female character with long red hair, and she becomes the oldest effigy of a female we have. She has a strong chin and nose. Her eyes give the impression of not being happy, perhaps in distress, as well as her grimacing look. Maybe it's because of this big crocodile, 10 meters across the top of the screen, plus another 4 meters for the tail. It's apparently a swimming crocodile, because we don't see its 4 legs. But I believe that the crocodile is just protecting her young, and the artist uses the red disc to create a striped or molten pattern on the juvenile. The crocodile protects the egg, which is just below its mouth. And we can sort of put this all together from north to south, or the top of the image is A. We have the cosmic man, which is the constellation Hercules. B is the constellation of Gaia and the eagle, the juvenile eagle. C is Lacerta, the lizard. D is Pegasus, the horse, the winged horse. E is Pisces, which is in this direction, the dolphin. F is Cetus, the sea monster, which we found as the Mediterranean monk seal. And the story sounds much better as a sea monster than a seal, although they probably both sound about the same in the night. G is Perseus, who is a swimmer, and I also believe is the body of the elephant, which the H is Ruger, the head of the elephant, and I is the trunk of the elephant, which is the constellation Taurus. J is Lynx. K is Cygnus, which this artist depicted as the great auk. L is Draco, the crocodile. And of course, Draco in mythology is the dragon. And now we have a source for dragons, the crocodiles. M is Ursa Major, which in the rear of Ursa Major, you can see the head of the mother bear, and the triangles between her legs are the conical heads of the juveniles. N is Leo the lion. O is Gemini, the Barbary ape, and the 2 bright stars, Castor and Pollux, are the eyes. P is our hero Orion, who holds the club and wears the pelt. And Q is Canis Major, and we can see that bright star Sirius, which is the Spitz dog, or the companion dog. So as this artist, or the hero on his journey, travels from north to south, the constellations emerge in his environment, and as well as the animals in both the terrestrial and the marine environments. So as above, so below, he's navigating by both. Now all these constellations, all these characters as we saw them, are overlapped with each other in the same sense as they're together within the cosmic egg before the cosmic egg explodes. So I believe that this is not just a cosmic egg myth, but this is a hero's journey myth. And some of the other constellations, Capricornus is likely the crab. And in the myth of Hercules, the crab bites at the leg of Hercules, and he's kicked off into the sky to become Cancer. So the Greeks had changed the story. And Aquarius becomes the overlapping of the man and the dolphin. Aquarius, the water bearer. And Sagittarius is the overlapping of the man and the horse. The Greek Claudius Ptolemy from the 2nd century CE is noted as the greatest astronomy of antiquity, and he put most of these constellations into the inventory, or the astronomical record. Ptolemy saw them as imaginary pictures without borders and overlapping each other. Only in modern astronomy have we created those borders and distinct stars which depict the animals and beings. Robert Newton believed that Ptolemy was a fraud because he saw constellations, or he recorded constellations that he couldn't have seen during his time. And he described it as the most successful fraud in the history of science. And Robert Newton was an astronomer and historian. Ptolemy was also the head librarian of the Library of Alexandria. He had records of thousands and thousands of scrolls and maps from times before his own. And so perhaps it wasn't that Ptolemy didn't see them in the night sky, but rather he saw them in somebody else's night sky, as depicted in the scrolls and maps. We may find other characters in this panel that have been recorded throughout time. And there was a letter to King Philip II of Spain from a Jesuit in 1570, and he describes a huge giant in the El Castillo cave, and a horrible serpent, and a terribly fierce hound that opens its wide mouth. And at sea, I believe that is the fierce hound that opens its wide mouth. And A, we can see a canid with ears down. D looks foxy, and B is unresolved. And the fierce hound at sea is not like any natural hound that we have among the canids. It's a mythical character. Well, the Polish astronomer Claudius recorded some of these other constellations that we had seen: Lacerta the lizard, fox, Canis Vinici as the dogs, and Leo Minor and lynx. Did he have a record of some sort, just as Ptolemy had? Well, how does this all work, and how could Ptolemy not see those stars in the night sky at that time? Well, there's a concept called precession, that the Earth wobbles over 26,000 year period. And as it wobbles, stars appear and disappear below the horizon. We can test this concept of precession against the Paleolithic record with the gallery of discs. On the south end, we had the constellation Orion as the man holding the club during a summer time period, late June, archaeologically dated around 34 to 36,000 years ago. Well, if we look at the constellations as they were viewed looking south at that time, we can see in the top left one that Orion is just above the horizon and Sirius is to his left. We can also see that the Orion character is upright to the horizon, whereas all the other ones, the constellations are slanted. And if we look at this concept of precession, we can see that the constellations travel above and below the horizon, or rather they appear to travel above and below over those time periods. And all these images are the highest point above the horizon that the Orion character constellation can be seen. And if we compare the 34 BCE one, it correlates very well to the distance above the horizon as the dolphin lifted the hero. We can compare those images to the so-called shaft of the dead man at Lascaux, France, 17,000 years ago in the Dordogne region. And we see the so-called dead man who is at an angle which is precisely the same as Orion was seen as he met the horizon 17,000 years ago, and as it is just before the sun rises. And so you can look into history and say, or the images, you say, well, every character looks like the standing man Orion, but in fact, they all don't look that way. And when we find the differences, such as this one at Lascaux, we can possibly say that this is an Orion character because that's how he would have looked 17,000 years ago, just as the one for the Gallery of Dis did in his time. We return back to this teacher and the apprentice and ask what he might have been telling and what story might have been told. It was likely the story of the hero, and this hero that encounters the damsel in distress, the woman with the long braided hair. And we see these images in modern times, of course, through Star Wars. And we have Luke and Princess Leia, and superimposed in the background is Darth Vader, and superimposed on the gallery disc image of all these other characters. So this Paleolithic art form is commonly used now in modern illustrations. Luke Skywalker was, of course, written and produced by George Lucas. And Luke too enters a cave in the second movie that was made. And Luke asks Yoda, what's in there? And Yoda responds, only what you take with you. And we too, today, as we walked into this room and we saw the images on this wall, we only took what was with us, what was within us. And we faced our fears, and we saw we were tested. We were tested to look behind the red disc. We were tested of multiple perspectives. And we learned a lot about ourselves, what we knew and what we didn't know, what was possible 34,000 years ago that no one ever would have imagined. And we find these heroes throughout time, and of course now the more modern one is Moana. But we find Hercules, the top center one, and to the bottom right we find Perseus, who is the constellation of the swimming man. And of course there's Luke and St. George, the dragon slayer. And if dragons come from this concept of the Paleolithic record, then I would argue that St. George is a reincarnation of this Paleolithic myth. In the bottom center one we find Journey to the West characters from the Chinese mythology. This common story of the hero's journey was first popularized by Joseph Campbell. And he said that there's a monomyth, a core story among people around the world, this hero, who answers the call, goes on a journey and faces trials and tribulations, and ultimately comes to a crisis point when he comes to face him or herself. And in that crisis point, the hero either overcomes the self-evaluation or not. And if the hero overcomes it, they return home to tell the story. And I believe that the teacher speaking to the early apprentice is the teacher who has taken this journey. And he's telling a new apprentice about what is to come, and how he's to encounter the animals in the world and navigate both the earth and the sky. Joseph Campbell drew heavily on the work of Carl Jung, and Joseph Campbell wrote a book about Carl Jung. And Carl Jung had many experiences, and one of them was in a dream, and he enters a cave. And that's fundamentally the storyline that George Lucas brought forward to the Luke Skywalker, who enters a cave and faces Darth Vader, or at least the Darth Vader that was in his mind. The immortal Bob Marley said that some say it's just a part of us. We've got to fulfill the book. And that is a homage, of course, to Carl Jung, who said that there's a collective unconscious, and that we keep retelling these stories in our heads. We can't escape from them. We change the sets, and we change the places and the costumes, but in the end, we fundamentally keep telling the same story. So we ask ourselves, going back in time to the beginning, of how did man first begin to see the stars? How did he first find them in his mind? How did he project his psyche into the cosmos? And Picasso had something to say about this. And he said that he looked into the world around him and he found the shapes. And he found the wood, and he found them in the rocks and bones. And one suggested a woman, another a bison. And from how he projected his own psyche into those shapes, he then found art. And of course, Picasso used that concept in his first Cubism work in 1907, Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, where he borrows two masks from the Altamira cave, which are believed to represent females. Or it's horses, I should say. And the most typical horses in Paleolithic cave art were mares. So Picasso takes those mares and puts them on the faces or heads of these two women. And he's showing that there's a tie between the Paleolithic, and the modern, and that we're just reinventing the past. And of course, Picasso found those shapes, or at least the Paleolithic artists found those shapes or natural irregularities in the cave, which they put the eyes and the mouth on. And Picasso took that forward to our modern time. We're reinventing the past. Nothing new is under the sun. And that takes us back to that missing link of sorts. How did we become modern man? How did we come to project, see the future and reflect on the past? In that same vein, when we start to worry about the future and regret the past. So everything that comes with a price. There's always a pound of flesh. And chimpanzees can't do that. And we find this chimpanzee-like being depicted reaching up to the stars. Well, I believe there was a point in time when there was a common ancestor of us and the chimpanzee that was on the beach. And perhaps that common ancestor fell in sync with the tides, or at least the females. The menstrual cycle is tied to the moon, which is of course to the tides. And that helped them, or us, to start telling time. And as a next step, we picked up the stars and perhaps the sun. But that's another presentation. And of course, it's about time, which separates us from the other animals in our world. And to be able to tell time, we have to be able to project our psyche into the cosmos. We have to be able to find points of light to gauge ourselves against. More of this is my work before Ryan Find the Face of the Hero, and I'm always available to give presentations at academic groups and civic associations. I can be reached through my webpage, and I appreciate this time to speak before this group and visit this fabulous university at San Diego. Thank you very much.